All right. So do we want to do application controller first?
Sure, yeah, I'll go ahead. Let me go ahead and pull this up here. Share my screen. Here we go. Okay, we've got multiple screens here. So a few things about the application control. It kind of looking at it from a nutshell, it's fairly simple the way it's kind of laid out and set up. I guess to kind of explain it is that it's kind of a way to modularize your application. So you can have your application control, and then you can have the different various aspects of it broken down and spread out, and it pulls from each one of those based upon the user's response. So here's a little chart here, and I have another one as well that kind of gives like a kind of a brief kind of understanding of how it's laid out, how it works. So you have the client here who then pulls or calls different commands from the application control, and then it will pull that from the mapper as well as from the target. And the target would be various, whatever the application would be. The most popular one looking online for me when I was trying to understand it was a very simple one would be like a Java-based calculator, where you have an application control that pulls different commands. So if the client is trying to do some addition, then application control will invoke the addition classes and modules that it would need to be able to do that. Or if they're doing subtraction, then the application control would then pull that part of it, and so forth. Whether whatever the client, the person is trying to do that, and then it would also pull from the mapper as well. So whatever the display that it may be invoking, it'll be able to pull that and show that consequently based upon the user's response. So I have I guess the concept of it is fairly simple on that. So I have another little chart here, kind of lays it out in another way, if it makes it a little bit easier. So you got the client here pulling from the application control, which could be a part of the servlet or also the MVC as well. And based on what they're invoking, and then it'll pull down from the rest of your module, which would be the different modules of the Java that it needs to be able to run that specific command or run or invoke that. Other popular things that they can be used for, you use it for a lot of things, but a lot of it is used for, that I've looking at examples, is also kind of like sales, like someone's trying to do like a print, like a purchase order and things like that. It can then pull up that information from the database. If you use, to add, subtract, add percentages based upon, sales individuals and things like that, it can do that fairly easily. And then, of course, then it shows you the view based upon what you're invoking. So it'll kind of simultaneously be able to do that for you. And here's a good example of some code here. This is actually specific to like a Java calculator. So I'm not sure how well it shows for everyone. Hopefully it's large enough. But yeah, and this here, I'll go ahead and increase it just to be sure here. So I'll zoom it in. There we go. So and this one's like an example of a Java calculator. And then what it does, you have like addition, you got employee based upon the purchase order that you'd be putting into. And then the main application will have various hash commands that it would be pulling that information from. So you got the addition, multiplication, divide, subtract, and so forth that it'd be pulling that from. And then you got the handler as well, which will also kind of pull from the different command that you're needing at that time. So it's fairly simple. Hopefully that kind of makes sense. I'm not sure if there's any questions about that. I know I'm still working on my application control app, so I can get that submitted this week. But this is kind of a general kind of breakdown how it works. I guess the concept of it is, the idea is that it's easier to manipulate and change over time rather than have one lengthy code that goes down, 900 lines of code or 2 or 3,000 lines of code. You can have that broken down and modularized, with addition, multiplication, subtraction, and this kind of a role of being able to do that. And then you can just go in and modify those specific modules rather than go through a lengthy, at length, in a very extensive piece of code. As you can see, that this one, is fairly simple, and it's, not even quite 30 lines of code at this point. But then you can, pull from the addition and multiplication, which are roughly about the same in length in code, depending on what you're trying to do. I mean, it all varies. But so if you're trying to do something similar with like a purchase order or things like that, or if you're doing even with a game, which you would also be able to pull based upon the commands and what you're trying to do, it might get much more lengthier, but it would be easier to break it apart. So that way you can make those changes and not have it affect the rest of your code, and make it easier to make mistakes at that point. So hopefully that makes sense for everyone.
Right. So it looks like here they're using the hash map, that the operator of whatever they want us to do, like if they want to add the numbers, they're using the add, the multiplier, the division, and the thing. That is the key. And the key then grabs the value which says go to the add function, go to the multiplier function, whatever. So that's how they're using that.
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so that it's implying right there would be the whatever the client, whatever the person that's running through the application, whatever they enter, then it would invoke that add or multiply and use those key multipliers to be able to come out with the appropriate response.
Right, but it's based off of that key, which is those other symbols, which is telling what they want them to do. So like if the person was adding in a number, because down here it says they're going to give two numbers.
Yes.
Number. So as the person enters in two numbers, it then says what operation it wants. And as it picks an add, a multiply, that is the key for this little map, which then says go make a new instance of add. You'd go to the add class and do whatever it says to do there.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So it's fairly simple. Hopefully that makes sense for everyone. Yeah, and I know that, I guess the upcoming weeks, I'm sure we're going to have some other ones that are like, I think like Melissa mentioned about like the servlets. I'm sure that's going to be much more in depth.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, the application control, I guess the whole process, the whole model around it is, I guess it's really good. It's like a best practice, essentially. I know we talk about that in business and also in IT, but it's really a best practice of being able to do programming as well, because it makes it so much easier as time goes on. You can quickly modify and manipulate your code to do what you want it to, in case all of a sudden you realize, I need to make these changes, or now I kind of want to be able to add maybe an additional numbers, or if I want to do additional types of mathematics. And in this example, you can quickly do that and just kind of see how you have it laid out. In addition to that, you can complicate it as necessary with it being kind of broken apart like that. It makes it much easier at a glance looking at your code and making those changes.
I was surprised that there's not that much out there on it for being a good practice and making it module, because I didn't find that much. Did you find very much on it to read outside of just the diagrams of what it looks like?
Not really. I kind of dug around for quite a while, and just looking at what people have posted online, and and just reading through it. It's very, I guess, kind of cloudy, kind of convoluted when you read through what other people have put up there. And I found other videos and YouTube instructions as well that also seem to kind of take it like a more like down all the way down to the roots level. There is specific code and not necessarily like a top level explanation of how it works, which makes it a little bit confusing because you're really trying to kind of get a basic understanding of how this really is and how it works. And it gets a little bit frustrating when you're not quite seeing that in there.
Right.
Right. Question for you, Robert. So I see that you have this built out, the application controller, and it's supposed to create a new instance of add. It looks like you have an add class. Would you be willing to show me that? Because I'm just curious to see how this connects to that and how that all works.
Okay, yeah, I don't quite have that finished yet because it's still in progress. So
Gotcha.
yeah, so I don't quite have that part there.
Okay.
So I'm learning as I go along.
No worries. I totally understand that. Okay, so I can see in theory how it works. I was just curious how it would work out in application. If you haven't gotten that far, totally understandable.
Yeah, I'm hoping that probably by tomorrow or latest by Thursday, I should have it all figured out and have the rest of it all spelled together. I've seen various videos on YouTube that they showed their examples and how they've gotten it to work, which is great. But at the same time, some of what they share, kind of goes like a whole nother direction, like I mentioned. So it makes it a little bit frustrating, and kind of like what Melissa said, it's also, there's not a lot on there specifically for this. So it's kind of like you're kind of getting bits and pieces from all over and kind of combining it to get a more broader perspective.
Right.
I have, mine's working. I can show it to you if you want.
Okay, yeah, definitely. Here, let me stop sharing, and if you want to throw yours up there, that'd be great.
Yeah, that would be. Let's see.
Okay, let me get mine open real quick. Okay, so so I'll just run it real quick and I'll show you. So it's going to ask you to enter a number. And right now I've got it set in, so if someone puts in 0, it's going to tell you it has to be greater than 0, just for what.
Gotcha.
If someone types in 2, it'll tell you it's not a valid number. And so we can put in, it'll ask us for another one. And now it's going to say, what do you want it to do? Do you want to find the area of a rectangle, the perimeter, or the triangle? And because these are the keys in the map, they have to hit an A, a P, or a T. If not, it'll break, but I've set it up so it won't. It just tells you didn't enter something. So if I put in an S, it'll say, that was not a valid choice. Please try again. If I have it set up where if they hit an A, lowercase, it will be read as if it was, and so it'll run it, and then it'll tell you the area of the rectangle is 20.
Oh, nice.
And so, so if you walk through, for me, the application, this is my main. So I've set up the scanner so that it'll recognize the keyboard.
Right.
They're using it. I'm needing 2 inputs, and then they need to pick a choice, meaning what do you want to do? That's the key to the map. And then I'm just asking, enter those numbers. Of course, because it's going to come in as a string, we have to parse it into an integer or a float or however. And once it meets through all of the catches to make sure it's a valid number and it's not going to bust the thing, it then calls the handle. It takes those choices and it goes and needs to handle it. So if we go over here, here's my handler. It's going to bring in that choice and their thing, and it's going to read the map to say, oh, they put in, their choice was A, and that now calls to this function, which you can find over here. And now in here, I'm just telling it what it needs to do. It's going to take those 2 integers and times them together because it's length times width to get the area. And then I'm just telling it to print it out.
Gotcha. Okay.
And then the way it works is that you have to have that handler, and the code is the same for everybody's handle, pretty much. You have to have, sorry, everything's up. You
No
need to have
worries.
something that says we're going to use the handler interface to go grab those.
Gotcha.
And then you
Okay.
run it on the control. And the control says where it's going to go. But what makes it nice, like Robert was saying, was that I could add to this list as many things as I want or classes, and it doesn't affect anything else I'm doing. If I wanted to remove one of these, I can take it out, and it doesn't affect how the whole overall program works.
Oh, yeah. That is really nice.
And so it can be modular, or you can expand it, or you could change it. And again, what makes it work is that we use that hash map where that initial key is what finds, and then I'm designating that the value is I'm telling it to go do something.
Yeah. Having written some stuff in like C++, this is being able to make those changes and stuff modular like that, like you would on a scripting language. That is so nice. Not having like a compilation error every time
Right.
you make the change. So that's good. Like
So that's mine. I just, like I said, I think it just needs to run whatever. But I followed and read a lot of those same examples that Robert showed, because I only could find the same things. The few links that were on, I think they were given on that PowerPoint that's inside of, read about what he's looking for each topic. And then what I could find on YouTube. And a lot of them use a calculator.
Yeah, and it makes sense given the way that application goes. That's probably the easiest example to do.
Right.
Yeah, and you can read up more additional things on Stack Overflow and other areas, but they seem like they take it more of a different direction and kind of almost like they kind of forget they're talking about application control.
Right.
But there are some, like kind of like Melissa shared, there are some good YouTube examples. There are some, there are a few other presentations and things online that you can find that really kind of give it a good example. Unfortunately, well, or maybe it's a good thing. I think our explanation here might be one to help people better in the future, more so than what I've been able to find.
Right. Well, that's great though. I like how you both were able to explain that. Makes a lot of sense. I'm excited to put it into practice.
Cool. So I guess for our next presentation, who has our next one?
I think it's Giovanni.
Okay.
Yep. That would be me. That was a really good presentation. It sounds a lot like model view control, so it might seem repetitive. So
no worries. I get it.
All right, let's see here. Let me try to share my screen. Can you guys see my screen?
Yep.
Okay. So I had made a little PowerPoint. Let me just turn that guy on. You guys seen a PowerPoint?
Mm-hmm.
There we go. Yeah.
Yep, we can see it.
I'm trying to look at my other screen, which disappeared. 1 second here. All right, so this is the PowerPoint. So my subject is MVC, which is the model view controller. And so what MVC is, it's the way to structure your applications. Doesn't really, it's not language specific, so you're gonna see it all over the place. I think it was created back, well, it first came about in 1979. And I remember that because that was when my wife was born. So I was reading all this information. I was like, hey, 1979, I know that year. So, but yeah, not language specific. And the thing that what MVC does, it's a lot like what the application controller did. It separates all the calculations from the interface. So part of what they teach is that better business practice to keep it all separate, so that when there's an error in one, it doesn't crash the whole system. Also, one class doesn't know about the other class. They don't even know they exist. So for what the model does, all the model was going to do for you is it's going to get the data, it's going to perform the method that is needed, and then it's going to provide access to the data, and it runs completely independently of the interface, which is actually your view. So this is the next slide. That's what is the view. And the view is what the user themselves see. It's what makes all that data that's processed in the background understandable to us. Let's see here. Our next one is the controller. And what the controller is, that would be the interpreter of that does that helps. It takes a request from the view, sends it over to the model. The model does all the processing, and then once it comes back with the result, the controller takes it back to the view for the user to see the results. One of the videos I saw kind of explained it like they took the scenario of a restaurant. So they take the scenario of you walking in, you order something from the waiter. You are going to be the view. The waiter is going to be the controller, and then the waiter takes your order and takes it over to the cook, and the cook's going to be the model. Now the cook gets all the ingredients that he needs to complete your order, which would be the data that it needs. And once it processes it all, it gives it back to the waiter, which is again the controller, and then the controller gives it back to you, which is the view. And I thought that was a pretty good example. A quick rundown on what the model does. So here's the examples that I found, and I'll walk through it through some of this code just to kind of explain it. So can you guys see the code here?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. All right. So the first one is going to be this student.java. This is going to be the example of the model. And all that this model is doing is it's simply going to hold the data and return the value. It doesn't know anything else other than to do that. So we'll get what this program is going to do. It was a quick example of updating a record. So it's going to change a student record from one name to another. So all that this is going to do is get that name and the roll number of the student and set and get kind of thing. The next one is the view. And all the view is doing is showing the results out to the user. So it's going to say the student name, and then the roll number that student is in. And then what we have here is the controller. And for the controller, since the model doesn't know that the view exists and the view doesn't know that the model exists, all that the controller is going to do is it's going to call the model to get and set the data, and then it's going to update the view once the model gets that information. So to see it in action, we'll see it here. This is our main. So this is going to create a simple model. It's going to create a simple view and controller, and then call the controller to update it from Marcus over to Andres. And that's going to be what it's changing. So the old name is going to be Marcus. That's going to be hard-coded on there as your update. So you could actually do a separate function like you would with the application controller, do a separate function that would ask you for input if you want to. But just for the simplicity of this example, we're just going to hard-code it in here. So when we run it, the simple process that it comes back is, you had a student whose name was Andres, that was roll number 25, and you changed it to Marcus, which is right here. Oops. Change it to Marcus, and he's still under roll number 25. And that is the basic concept of the MVC. It's just a very simple, best practice way of doing things. You want to make sure that all your classes are separated so that you have better coding practice as far as when you need to troubleshoot. same thing as the application manager. You're not troubleshooting everything. You're just troubleshooting one portion of the program. Let me go back to the PowerPoint. Actually, I think that was it for the PowerPoint. The last thing was just the conclusion page. So it's in summary for MVC, it's a way to structure the application. The model handles the data and the methods. The view presents the data to the user, and the controller just coordinates. Now, one very important thing to remember is that the model is not the data. Data is completely separate. It's just information that the model uses, but it's not actually, data is not part of model. It's just something that it uses. And that is my quick rundown on MVC. You guys have any questions?
I don't. That was great.
Yeah, that was great. Sorry, no questions, but I really love the example and the way that you explained it. I don't know. I don't know if everyone else feels this way. I feel like I've used the model view controller in so many of my programming classes, and I think it's just because it works so well.
Yeah, and that's true. I mean, you use it in everything.
Oh yeah.
Big one is going to be in web design. If you do any kind of web design, I mean, your web page is your interface, and all your stuff running in the background, and it just comes back to the user.
For sure, yeah.
Yeah, definitely. That's good. It reminded me of is doing web design. You got everything broken apart, and it pulls from each one of those and displays the appropriate one. And yeah, looks great.
Oh. Cool. So what else do we have for tonight? Any other questions, comments?
Yeah, I don't have any. I was trying to think, I didn't look to see who is doing next week's teaching.
I think I'm doing next week.
You're on next week, Ronald?
Yes, I have Jason, I think.
Okay. Yeah, because there should be two.
Let's see.
Yeah, let me bring it up here real quick.
Okay.
Listen, 5 and 6, right?
Right.
Yes,
I think I
it's
got it
6.
here. There we go.
So it should be Titan and Ronald.
Yeah.
Right here.
Titan and Ronald, and then it'd be the next week. Cool.
And then it's subject 5 and 6, and I think it's on the next page.
Yeah, and I think it's servlets and
David.
oh, is it said hibernate? Okay.
Hibernate and
URL and HTTP/Android.
Jason and Jason.
It's cool.
very cool. Okay.
All right.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you.
All right, and then I'll post up this recording onto both Google Hangouts and on our board.
Okay, cool.
Awesome.
Hey, Melissa, I have a question for you. So when you did your topic last week,
Yes.
did you just submit your recording as your familiarity assessment? Or did
No,
you do a different
I didn't.
thing?
I just filled out the paper. I just filled out the template and said I didn't have a recording
Oh, okay.
because I had already turned mine in. I had turned mine in the week before.
Oh, okay. Okay.
But you don't need to have a video to turn it in. You can just say none.
Oh, all right. Perfect.
If you want to turn one in, and then what you would do is you would give a link to this recording, and then you tell him exactly where you want him to start looking at it.
Oh, okay.
So if you're using it, then you would say, starting at, 5 point whatever minutes, 5:30 seconds into it, you'll see where I've now described and talked about my understanding of this.
All right. Cool.
And that way he can get right to where he's supposed to look. If you were going that way. Like I said, so when I did mine on collections, I just wrote some basic things or big bullet points. I just wrote in a little paragraph on that little sheet
Okay.
saying this is what I understand and why you would want to use these things. It was a very similar to a lot of the stuff that I discussed, but I just wrote it in there. And then what I wrote on threads, executors, and runnables, I just walked through my program.
Okay.
I just wrote, this is what it does, and we start here, and then you would go here, and I turned in the 2 files that he needed to look at.
Oh, okay.
I don't know if that's what he wants, but he passed and said that I had hit a basic level on both of those.
Okay.
Well, that's good. I wasn't quite sure either, so I actually threw a PowerPoint together for each one of mine that I've submitted just to kind of share my understanding where I'm at and everything.
Yeah, and I tried to make in my note or like in the comment sections above, in the program, I try and say this is what it's doing and this is why. So that if he's reading it, then I'm hopefully showing I have an understanding. But my thought was, if I can walk through and tell you what my program's doing, I'm hopefully familiar with it enough. So I didn't know what he was looking for, but that's what I wrote on my executor threads. And then I just talked about how you use a runnable and what would be the point of a thread and just extending a class with a thread. So I hit the main points of what each one were, but then I mainly just kind of walked through my program in words.
And showed him what it was. Okay.
And then gave him the 2 files so that he would see what I just described.
Okay.
And that seemed to be enough. But I do know when I talked with the online tutor, because I had just stopped in hoping that maybe they could give a little more clarity on, sometimes what they're expecting on some of these topics. And he had said a lot of times, he just said, I feel I have a basic level of this, and here's my program. So I don't think you need tons, but I was trying to make sure I wouldn't hopefully have to redo it.
Right. Okay.
And stuff. So, but yeah, I haven't turned in a link with a video yet. I am assuming that more of these links and videos will come into play when we actually do the professional review part or the professionalism. He told us that we didn't really have to worry about it till week, I don't know, he'll start talking about, I think maybe around 7 or 8. But I get the impression that we will use the videos more then. And what we're saying is, at this point in the video, you can see I showed respect or asked questions, and it was very professional as we discussed this.
Okay.
And stuff. But obviously, if you're teaching the subject, I don't know why you wouldn't want to turn it in. If it's going in when you're turning it in, like I said, for me, I had already turned in both of the 2 topics before we discussed them here in group. So I didn't have a video. So,
Sounds
okay.
good.
Good to know.
All right. Well, we'll plan to see everybody. And then, of course, we do have the board if there's any questions there. I haven't really seen anybody put anything up. Figured that these first couple have been pretty easy. I might have trouble with, I've never used Tomcat, and I've never done anything with servlets or JSON, so we'll see how that goes.
Okay.